Book 4, Falcon in the Barn, Chapter 13. And then by tomorrow, we'll have some very fascinating results. Seriously, the older balding man sighed loudly at the men gathered around him. How difficult is it for you to put it all together? I sent you, he pointed at a hefty man who blushed, one section to accomplish, then told you. A slender man looked down at his feet and fidgeted. Specifically what materials to gather and sent in order to... Where are you? He looked around until he found the offender hiding behind a taller man who also wore a sheepish expression. Ah, yes, you. Sent an order to you with timings and you. He jabbed an accusatory finger at another man who tried to appear stoic. I explained personally to you how it all goes together. Now, how is it that one brilliant man like me can figure all this out, create detailed descriptions, and send it to semi-competent creatures who then bungle it all up? Does this mean that 10 of you aren't equal to 1 of me? Fascinating, he mumbled as he sifted through the confused notes. May have to create some speculations about the ineptitude of committee work when I finally get this mess straightened out. Look, he announced to the men again, it's really quite simple and you nearly have it all correct. Why didn't you just send us all the entire plan to begin with? Asked the attempting to be stoic man. The balding man looked at the ceiling. They really are that dense, aren't they? He asked the building. Dropping his gaze to those surrounding him, he said, What do you think? All of this information in the hands of just one man or several? What if it were intercepted before it reached here? No one would have been able to figure it out, someone bravely murmured. The balding man squinted. An intelligent man could. Now, since some of this was done correctly, I can salvage this. And then by tomorrow, we'll have some very fascinating results. Very fascinating indeed. We might just change the entire world. On the morning of the 59th day of planting season, 336, Perrin tried to leave the house early in the morning by the kitchen door, but was held back by his wife. I promised you already, I won't go beyond the border of the farm. I'll be miles away from the fighting, and nothing, absolutely nothing, will go wrong, he told Mari as she kept her arms wrapped around him, her face pressed against his chest. Just let me go with you, she pleaded. I'll stay back at the farm and help the surgeons with the injured. You can't promise nothing will go wrong. Shem warned me that... You need to stop listening to Shem, Mari. He held her at arm's length and stooped to look at her in the eyes. When the 2 of you start nattering together... Her chin quivered. I didn't mean it like that, but I'm tired of being pecked at. Karna will be at my side the entire offensive. He knows what to watch for, and he'll send you a messenger if I go a little berserk, all right? He said, shaking her a little. And honestly, a little berserk might be exactly what this offensive needs. Ever consider that? To his surprise, she chuckled sadly. All right, Colonel Berserk, go play. I'll sit here with your children for the next 3 days, fretting and worrying, but you have your fun now. I love you. You know that, don't you? He shook her again. You have a strange way of showing it, Mr. Shin. He pulled her in for a kiss long enough that Pato, who was walking in for his last goodbye, grimaced before turning around. Give them a few minutes, Jates. You don't want to come in here, trust me. Poor boy, Mari laughed to her husband as she reluctantly stepped back. He has the worst timing in the world. By the way, I do know you love me. I love you too. I know, and I will be fine. Mari sighed. Please come home to me. You can't get rid of me too easily, woman. After goodbyes to his children, he mounted his horse waiting in the alley and rode to the fort with 2 eager sergeants. He took only a moment to run up the stairs of the command tower. He smiled at Hysamum's purple banner with the word edge stitched in brilliant yellow, took it off the wall, and bundled it under his arm. "This offensive is for edgers, after all," he murmured. He jogged over to the supply building, took a pole he'd prepared earlier, and attached the banner to it. Grinning, he positioned it in the saddlebag on his horse, where it could flap for everyone to see. "Don't want anyone getting lost now, do we?" he said cheerily to a corporal who eyed the bright and slightly garish banner. An hour later, 200 men rode from the fort straight to the west in the staging area for the offensive. Nothing could wipe the smile from Perrin's face, not even Captain Thorne, who rode on his right and frequently looked behind him to make sure the soldiers stayed in formation. The fort didn't have enough horses for each man going to Moorland, so many were borrowed from the village, and Thorne, being the horseman he claimed to be, was put in charge of making sure none was lost. Perrin noticed that Sergeant Major Zenas on his left, however, kept watching Perrin from the corner of his eye. As they neared the barren farm, waiting to be flattened under so many boots and hooves, Perrin spotted a cloud of dust rising in the southwest. Soon it revealed several hundred men, led by a beaming Major Fod. Before Perrin had the chance to absorb the fantastic scene of 300 men, plus their horses and wagons, to the south arose another massive cloud, eventually producing Major Jordan and Lieutenant Colonel Karna, who combined their 600 men and rode together, trampling all kinds of terrain for several miles, and grinning all the way. The only one not grinning, Perrin noticed, besides Thorne, was Shem, who kept eyeing his commander. But Perrin didn't care. By dinner time, a tent village was erected 3 miles from the village of Moorland, and the more than 1,000 men were happy, eating, and eager to go hunting. Perrin spent only a moment to the hectic afternoon to pause and take in the scene. Men, horses, tents, shouts, and swords. A farm turned into a camp for an army the size of which hadn't been seen in generations. A nervous farmer and his wife cowering in their house, their curtains flickering as they watched column after column of soldiers turn their rich, dark fields into a mucky mess. Perrin's chest swelled and burned with pride. "Father," he whispered, when he had an uninterrupted minute, "I hope you're in a part of paradise that lets you see me breaking your rules, because I think you and Grandfather Perrin would love this." Hum, this doesn't look right. Ho, what's this? A crevice? Not good, not good. Bennett stretched his leg over the gap in the ground that presented no discernible bottom. He grasped hold of a tree limb above him, used it to stabilize himself, then jumped over the crack in the earth. Safely on the other side, he chuckled smugly. "Still know my way around, he. Younger men learn a thing or two from me still, hum. Just need to bring them out here, where my true expertise lies. After all, the wood knows how to grow and burn. And Gadman thought I couldn't do any of this anymore. Well, is he in for a surprise?" He looked around the trees. "Seems thicker than some years ago. Taller, too. Suppose forests have a way of growing, you see. Hi. Thicker, denser. Oh, my. This isn't quite—" He stopped and stared off into the distance, which, at that point in the forest, was only about 3 feet in front of him. "I think the wind's about to hit the droppings. The question is, am I the wind, the droppings, or what's about to get hit?" After another ponderous moment, he said, "Now where the slag did that mountain go?" After dinner, 12 men stood around a large detailed map of Moorland in the command tent, studying the marked houses and the directions outlined for the assault. Everyone except for Shem, who looked around the tent. "Colonel, where's Benniff?" Perrin waved that off. "Said he wasn't feeling too well some hours ago. We really don't need him now. He got his section of the camp set up, so I told him to go lay down for a while." Shem shifted nervously. "Permission to go check on him?" Perrin looked up from the map. You think that's really necessary?" The look in Shem's eyes was undeniable. Now several other officers looked up from the map and stared at Zenas. "Sir, I know the map and your plans as if I wrote it myself," the sergeant major told him. "Please give me just a few minutes to check on Banff." "Of course, Zenas," Perrin said, unable to decipher the veiled look in his friend's eyes. It was something he'd never seen before, and that was rare. "But get back soon. You don't know everything." Shem nodded and darted out of the tent. Jordan looked at Perrin for an explanation, but Perrin shrugged. "Zenas will just have to catch up. You all have had the past 2 days to review the attack plans. I've worked in your suggestions, and now I have one more announcement to make." Each man looked up from the map at Perrin. "We don't attack at dawn," he said quietly. "We hit Moorland after sundown tonight." "Tonight?" Karna cried, saying what every other man would have said if his mouth were not hanging open. "I'm sure Colonel Shin has a good reason for attacking tonight," said Thorne loyally. Perrin fought the urge to roll his eyes. "I do. We now all realize that even the most trusted soldier might be an agent for the Garters. Should there be any other taste riplacks among our men, they will still believe the attack is in the morning, until they find themselves in the middle of it, incapable of sending an early warning to his partners in Moorland." The expressions on the other commanders' faces suggested they had considered the same possibility. "We now have only 11, Perrin continued, "who know that the attack will begin in just 1 hour. If the Garters at Moorland have been warned in any way, they'll be preparing right now to ambush us while we sleep. So we'll just have to get them first." Jordan grinned. "Then what are we waiting for? Slap, call in the rest of the officers and let's mount up." Perrin smiled. Sometimes his job was just so easy. Shem didn't know this part of the forest as well as he did the forest above Edge. Actually, he didn't know it at all. It had taken him several minutes just to circle back enough to find a route in without being noticed by any soldiers. And once he was in the trees, he felt for the first time the nervousness every other man must have felt about the forest. He didn't know where anything was, not even Banff. He wasn't in his tent, and none of the men from Edge had seen him for the past 3 hours. And now Shem, just 30 paces into the unfamiliar trees, smelled a hint of sulfur. Not knowing its source made him jumpy. The whole day was making him jumpy, but he couldn't reveal that to anyone, especially Perrin. The colonel was in rare form. As hesitant as Shem was about the offensive, Perrin was enthusiastic. A part of Shem was thrilled to see his friend so engaged in something besides his paranoia. Watching Perrin sit astride a willing brown stallion, directing their 200 soldiers, 30 wagons in teams, and 150 horses as they rode in massive formation from the fort, was breathtaking. Hundreds of villagers had rushed to see the spectacle heading west. Perrin, riding at the front with Shem by his side, was, well, the only word Shem could think of was glowing. He had something to do, and he was on fire to do it. But he was almost frightening. Perrin's countenance shone with what Shem could define only as ferocious joy. And all of the men felt it too. If any were apprehensive, they simply looked at their commander and were instantly infected with his determination to rid the world of its most vexing neighbor. The 30 men left behind at the fort with Raiden and Afra, some ill, some injured, some timid, looked almost envious that they weren't joining the throng. Shem saw the same joyful ferocity contaminate the other armies that met them at the farm. Jordan, Fod, and Karna broke into grin at the sight of the massive army. The 4 commanders shared conspiratorial winks, as if they were teenage boys who were just about to pull off the greatest prank in the history of the world. And in a way, Shem thought to himself, they were. He seemed to be the only one worried about how all of this might shake down in the end. besides Lemuel, that is. But Shem wasn't going to devote any more thought to the captain. Unpredictable and recently quiet, then he had to. He just kept reminding himself that this was a battle situation, and Shem outranked him. It was the only thought that cheered him that day. A few times on the ride over, Perrin caught Shem watching him. "What is it, Sergeant Major?" he finally said. "I've never seen you so serious." "This is serious, Colonel," Shem reminded him. "I know that," Perrin responded, almost insulted. "But look around you, Zenas. Did you ever imagine we could bring something like this together?" That was part of his concern. There were many things Shem had seen that Perrin had never imagined. Years ago, Shem had felt overwhelmed by his position at the fort. It didn't help any that Hogel Densel had pulled him aside, told him he knew, really knew, who Shem was and why he was there, then told him it was his duty to keep watch over Perrin. After that, everything became so complicated. And it never got easier. Sometimes he felt as if he could barely keep it all straight. Days like this, for example, were especially taxing. And now the forest had swallowed up one of Shem's most nagging worries. "Benef," he muttered, "where did you go? You're not supposed to be out here." Shem crept cautiously up a rise, picking his way between the trees and listening for hissing, bubbling, or babbling, as Benef was prone to do. Shem had been gone for at least 45 minutes. Perrin must surely have missed him by now. A horn blast in the distance spun Shem around. The blast drifted toward him a second time, then rapidly for a third time. "No, not already, Perrin! We're not attacking until morning, remember?" Shem kicked at a rock and groaned. He had to take the risk. "Benef!" He felt a presence right behind him. Then a hand covered his mouth, while an arm wrapped around him tightly. "What is wrong with you, Zenas?" a voice hissed in his ear. "You're going to ruin everything." The arm released him, and Shem twisted away to face his captor. "Oh, Dorman, am I glad to see you. It's been a while, hasn't it?" he said to the man in green, dark mottled clothing. "No time for reunions, Shem. Why are you yelling at the trees?" "Benef's out here, I know it. He's going to warn the Garters we've arrived, but—" "It doesn't sound like that matters anymore," Dorman said. "The colonel is starting the offensive right now? Isn't that what 3 horn blasts mean? Mount up?" Shem shook his head. "I had no idea, honestly. No idea he was up to this. I need to get back. I'm supposed to be leading the charge on the north side." "Then go. We're ready. And we'll watch for Benef." Shem slapped Dorman on the back and ran out of the forest, hoping he was going in the right direction. How ironic would it be if he couldn't tell his future grandchildren about the first major offensive in the Army's history, the one that he missed because he was lost in the forest. Perrin sat atop his mount watching the last of the men ride west. The sun had set 10 minutes ago, and he quickly lost the silhouettes of Jordan and Thorn as they led the charge of 900 men. Not since the Great War had so many soldiers ridden together toward a common enemy, which, back then, meant the soldiers of the northern villages attacking those of the southern villages. At least now the enemy was clear, with no innocents involved. Or so Perrin hoped. If there were children there... No, he couldn't explain it, but he was sure there weren't. Something else was there, however, which needed to be destroyed, tonight on the 59th day of planting. As the cloud of men and horses rumbling like thunder faded into the dusk of the evening, Perrin envisioned for the 100th time the attack patterns 6 of the groups would execute in order to reach each remaining structure at the same time. Torches would be lit, swords and long knives would be employed, and if it all went well, which it should because there was no reason why it shouldn't, all of it would be swift and humane. which was more than the Garters could say about their assaults on the world. A seventh swath of soldiers would encircle the village, trapping any Garters that tried to escape. And if perchance a Garter slipped through that line, there'd be another 50 new and somewhat raw recruits, not so skilled with the sword, but well trained in bows and arrows and ready to take aim. And maybe, just maybe, one exceptionally lucky and desperate Garter might slide past them and find himself running blindly to the east, and perhaps jump across the canal where he could meet the sword of Ralph Shin. Perrin gripped the reins tighter, unsure if he really wanted that or not. Instead, he focused on the fantastic sight leaving him. He wished he'd hired an artist to render the image. The uniforms, the horses, the dust, the fading golden light, the rumbling of hooves. There was no way to capture that sound, but the ground trembling as they cantered away would stay with him forever. And there he sat on his horse, watching it all go on without him. He wished for a moment that he was a falcon. An aerial view of the soldiers weaving through the village in perfect precision would be extraordinary to witness. No Garter would have time to warn his neighbors. They may hear the commotion of the approaching army. Perrin was betting on that, to bring each Garter to his door in confused curiosity. But no man would have time to react to the offensive, arriving just after dark, just like they attacked. And Perrin would miss every moment of it. He growled in frustration as the last soldier and horse left his field of vision. At a gallop, even that last soldier would be upon moorland in less than half an hour. Perrin closed his eyes to envision the small, scruffy hill that served as a buffer between the cluster of houses that used to be the village and the farms beyond it. The mound of earth effectively shielded much of moorland from the world's view, and also would block moorland's view of the approaching army. Perrin's mental eyes rushed over the area until his mind decided to give up the useless dreaming. He opened his eyes to the abandoned farms before him, laid open in a wide expanse all the way to the ditch that marked the border between moorlands and Edge's territories, where Perrin's mount stood as restless as its rider. "This is stupid," Perrin mumbled to Karna, on his horse next to him. Perrin's horse trampled the ground and snorted in annoyance. For the first time, Perrin had found an animal that matched his weight and personality, and he couldn't let it run as desperately as he wanted it to. "Even though horses know sitting here is stupid, why am I here?" "Colonel," Karna said in his best calming voice, used for approaching a hungry bear, "because you're needed here. Jordan's fine. He's the only man I know more aggressive than you. There's plenty of leadership out there, and what happened to 'I can handle this'?" "I thought I could, Perrin," he said sullenly. "I'm not needed here, and you know that. Because of stupid old men 80 miles away, I can't leave this farm." He pouted as he swung his horse around and looked longingly to the west. Perrin sighed. "You used to call me your second mind," he reminded him. "I realize that Thorn now—" Perrin's severe look stopped him. "Will never be my second mind. You may have your own fort, but I still claim your mind." Perrin smiled at that. "Good. Then take my advice. Get off your horse, Perrin." "What?" "Just get off. Let's go back to the map, review different scenarios should something unexpected happen, and be useful here." "Useful here," Perrin repeated with a snarl. "Part of leadership, you know, realizing when it's time to let the younger ones have a chance, knowing that letting them go is difficult to watch but vital to their development." Perrin scoffed. "Well, that's stupid too." Karna's eyebrows went up. "That's the little speech your father told me when he first sent me off to Edge. Let the younger ones have a chance. Lots of officers thought the job of starting a new fort was too much for just a captain and a lieutenant, but we did all right, didn't we?" "My father didn't say anything to you," Perrin grumbled. "You're making that up." Does it sound like something I would make up? No, Perrin admitted. After a moment, he said, I've been wondering what he would think of all of this. I'm not sure what he would say, but I think Ralph would be pleased. I think he would too. Perrin stared out into the darkness. Really, Brillin? Who's going to know if I break my probation? Only about 900 men out there. The 100 plus in the tents behind us overseeing supplies and waiting for injured. And last and most worrisome of all, the High General's main tattler, his grandson Lemuel. Come on. Brillin dismounted and gestured to Perrin. We have work to do. Perrin's persistence flagged. He sighed, dismounted, tied up his horse to an old fence post, and trudged after Brillin to the tent. Brillin lit a lamp and sat down at the large detailed map laid out on the makeshift table. You really created this all by yourself? Perrin scoffed. What's that supposed to mean? I had Brighter's help, if that's what you're wondering. I mean, Brillin chuckled consolingly, that I didn't know you were a map maker. I know you have that collection of old maps you salvaged from the trash heaps in Idamia years ago, but I never knew you could draw one yourself. I sense a compliment in there, so I'll take it. Perrin winked at him. But yes, I consulted my outdated maps for different ways to designate terrain, buildings, movement. Drawing all those little trees took forever, though. But they're very consistent, said Brillin, as if praising a 6-year-old. I think you got nearly every single one represented. Perrin scowled affably at him, then looked out the tent opening to the west, to the masses of trees that taunted him to come see if he drew them correctly. I was thinking, Brillin said, and it sounded to Perrin as if he were very far away, that should the Garters retreat into the forest, over here to the east, Colonel, are you paying attention? Over here, to the east, the forest narrows. We should deploy the remaining bowmen within this clearing just off the edge of the forest. Eyes here, please, Colonel. Good boy. They could take shots at anyone trying to return to Moorland in the morning. Perrin exhaled as he sat down by Brillin. He rested his chin on the map and stared past it. Stupid, he whispered to the tent. Shem glanced behind him, his heart racing faster than his horse. Just 20 minutes ago, he'd run from the forest, doing up his trousers to look as if he'd been detained with some other kind of business, and reached his mount just as Jordan signaled for the collective army to form up behind their assault commanders. Shem had barely scrambled onto his horse as his 150 soldiers positioned themselves behind it, and regarded Shem with not a great deal of confidence, seeing as how he joined them at the last minute. Most of them weren't from Edge either, and perhaps were a bit put out that they'd be following the horse with the showy purple and yellow banner, hoisted high on a straight stick, secured in the saddle pack and flapping in the breeze. Still, he was in place to lead them, and as Jordan waved his torch in the air, Shem kicked his mount, and the race was on. It was to be as silent a race as possible, though. Colonel Shin wanted the residents of Moorland to be surprised, to hear thunder or deceit rumbling. He didn't want them to realize the northern army of Idamia was barreling down on them, sword swinging. Shem frequently glanced over to Jordan, a man he knew was a natural whooper. But if the major could keep silent, so too would the rest of the soldiers. But Jordan was grinning widely, probably catching a few bugs in his teeth in his excitement. The torch he waved was now in a holder on the back of his saddle. Each of the commanders had a torch, something for his men to follow in the growing darkness, then to throw into the wooden structures to set Moorland on fire. Shem's men could also follow the banner that Perrin had shoved into Shem's saddle pack. For me, he said, when he lashed it into place. Since I can't see the attack, at least the banner will. Then, before the wretchedness of Perrin's disappointment in missing it all, and the solemnity of the moment could sink into Shem's heart, Perrin added, And make sure that hideous thing doesn't catch on fire, all right? Hysamum would kill me." Behind him, the 150 riders and horses maintained a steady gallop, and Shem saw the low hill before moorland beginning to take shape in the twilight shadows. Again, conflicting emotions bombarded Shem. Taking lives always shook his resolve. He hoped anyone hiding in the buildings would escape him before he set it alight. He'd lead the soldiers to the slaughter, but he didn't want to be the butcher. That wasn't why he signed up. The small hill loomed larger, and behind it would be the remains of moorland, sheltered peacefully against the hills nearly surrounding it, and oblivious. Shem reached behind him, gingerly pulled out his torch to raise as a signal, and made sure he didn't hold it too high to catch Hysamum's banner snapping in the wind. Rigoff and his division would be following Shem's group going to the right, while Jordan and Thorn and 2 more divisions took to the left. In the massive darkness moving behind him, Shem made out 2 torches bringing up the rear, Fod and his lieutenant, ready to redirect any lost soldiers. Shem raised his torch and waved it 4 times to signal his group to follow him around the hill. Impressively, Jordan held in his whoops as he waved his torch in another pattern and split off from Shem. Faster than Shem expected, there were the structures, many of them lit by lamplights and with smoke rising in the chimneys, indicating that, yes, they were indeed inhabited. And immediately Shem spied his target, the only remaining 2-story building faintly highlighted by the last of the twilight. Perrin was an excellent mapmaker and route planner, regrettably. Shem firmed his grip on the torch and swallowed. The older man bustled about the room, lining up boxes, straightening up supplies, and barking out orders. "Keep it organized! What did I say about organization?" The scruffy men standing against the sides of the room looked daringly at each other. Someone had to put an end to his meddling, but no one was about to do it here with such ingredients surrounding them. "Precision, organization, neatness, keep clean, keep cautious, or we'll have a disaster. Now, while we want a disaster, we don't want it happening to us. Once we get this to edge, then—" A noise outside the windows of the stone and mortared building caused the old man to pause in his efforts to cover a crate. He looked up as the sound increased, like the rumble of thunder, and the men he was lecturing frowned and glanced around. "Must be a storm coming," one of them decided. The older man shook his head. "Clear sky before the sun went down. No wind, no storm. What is that?" "Maybe deceit rumbling," offered another man. "Did that during the land tremor." The older man sighed loudly at their inanity. "Do you feel anything shaking?" "Well, I do now," someone declared. The older man was about to open his mouth when he realized that the ground was beginning to tremble. Someone outside shouted, followed by dozens more yelling. The older man squinted out the window into the vacant lot. Men were streaming toward his 2-story structure, toward any structure, in a panicked run. Irritated at the commotion, the older man made his way to the door and yanked it open. Before he could demand what was going on, he heard a distinct shout. "Soldiers! Soldiers!" Around the corner of the still intact building rushed a swarm that made the old man gasp in dismay. Soldiers, hundreds of them, all on horseback, causing the ground to tremble and the air to whoosh. Each soldier had his sword drawn, slicing man after running man, and trampling those who fell. A horse and rider burst past him, slashing at him but narrowly missing. The old man dropped to the ground in shock, watching as dozens of men fled into the buildings, only to be chased by streams of soldiers that never ended, and all of them with blades. It was the flash of purple that caught his eye, a banner of some sort, raised high like a flag on a horse that whipped past him, and stitched onto the purple cloth was a word in bold, sickly yellow: Edge. "Shin!" the old man cried out. "Slagging son of a sow!" Soldiers and horses poured in from every corner, hitting buildings with shocking precision as if they knew exactly where to go. The man looked around wildly, trying to discern if any of the soldiers were actually Perrin himself, in direct violation of the probation that they set on him, that the administrators had placed on him. But there was too much chaos. Men screaming, running, torches, horses, blades, bodies falling in front of him with wounds he knew were too accurate to treat. He scrambled to his feet and raced back into the building, slamming the door behind him. His workers paced from window to window, staring out at the commotion and bumping into the crates. "Be careful!" the old man shrieked, shifting a crate so that it wouldn't bump or, worse, crash into another. "The last thing we need right now." "Fire!" cried a man, frantically gesturing to the window. The old man rushed to it along with the rest of his workers. That was the very last thing they needed right now. Even more soldiers poured into what used to be the small village green, now dead and brown, throwing torches through the windows of the remaining buildings. "No, no, no, no," the old man murmured frantically, spinning and turning and looking for some kind of solution. "They're coming!" someone shouted. The old man rushed to the window as a soldier on horseback charged toward his building, the hideous purple banner behind him flapping. In the torchlight, the old man recognized the soldier's face, and the fraction of the second he could focus on him. "Quiet, man!" Brizek exclaimed. Zenas threw the torch. The window imploded. Dr. Brizek watched in horror as the black powder on the table next to him began to dance. And that's the end of the chapter. I don't normally like to end them on a cliffhanger like this, but it was a long enough chapter. I'll get the next one recorded very soon. Thank you.